Welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. I'm Chad Robichaux, and Jeremy's out today, but I think we're going to have a great show. If you're listening on Mojo 50, thanks for tuning in. And if you're on YouTube, definitely like, share, and subscribe. Make sure everyone knows to definitely check it out on YouTube as well as all of our syndicated networks. Today, I have one of my great friends and I would say teammates at Mighty Oaks, one of the advisors to Mighty Oaks, on the show, David Barton, known as America's historian, New York Times bestselling author, America's historian again, and not only America's historian, I believe is expert in the Constitution, American history, and really for today's topic, Bill of Rights, and also the founder of WallBuilders, and we've been on WallBuilders show and some of the work that he does. Definitely check out his website at WallBuilders and learn more about what David does. So David, welcome.
Hey,
welcome to have you on.
Hey, Chad, good to be with you again, bro. Thanks for all you do.
Yes, absolutely. Well, country's kind of, maybe the world, but the country's kind of in a mess right now. But I want to start off here because there's been so many questions from the veteran community and just for people outside the veteran community, for whatever reason, they come to Mighty Oaks and looking for answers. When are we getting out of this? When is the Corona thing over? There's so many different restrictions that are still being imposed on the freedoms of Americans. And the best kind of way that I can explain, I understand it, is on May 1st, the president has removed the restrictions, federal restrictions, and moved into a phase plan to move back, to turn the economy back on and let Americans get back to work again and get back to normal life again. And in doing that, he put the responsibility on a state level to each independent governor, which I think is a brilliant move on behalf of the president, because it puts the pressure on the governors to, from their own people, their own constituents, as well as regulations that they're under. Had the president just said that we're going to reopen and the states didn't have a choice, it would have been a huge uproar. And so I think it was pretty wise of him to put it on the governors.
Yeah,
and I just want to hear you just kind of start off with your thoughts on that.
Well, first thing is, let me back up even before the question you asked. Is when you come to something like this, you've got several things to look at. What is the constitutional limitations, for one, because all these elected officials, from mayors to the president, have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. So you have to look at constitutional considerations. You also have to look at historical considerations. This is a pandemic, and as far as most Americans today know, there's nothing like this we've ever dealt with. And let me just say, that's nonsense. You look at where we are now in America, about 70,000 deaths at this point. Okay, 70,000 deaths. I'll just take you back to something as close as 1968, the Hong Kong flu, where we had 100,000 American deaths, much smaller population. Let me back up to 1957, the Asian flu, 116,000 American deaths. Let me back you up to 1918, Spanish flu, 675,000 American deaths. We had a population half the size of today. 50 million died globally. I can take you back and just look at New York City. That's the worst. Nearly 1/3 of all the deaths in the United States have come out of New York City, a single city, not a state, but a city. So the death rate in New York City is about 0.2% of overall residents. 1 out of every 500 is dying there. In the nation, it's 1 out of every 5,000 dying, or about 1/100th of 1%. So our mortality rate, look at how much we've shut down for a mortality rate of 1/100th of 1%. Let me take you back to the smallpox epidemic of 1633, where the mortality rate was over 70%. In other words, if there had been 330 million Americans back then, 250 million would have died in that pandemic. That's a much more lethal than anything we face today. And so I go through all sorts of stuff. Look at cities, the yellow fever epidemic, 1793, 25% of Philadelphia is wiped out. So what we're looking at, this is nothing new. The fact that we don't know our history, don't know the Constitution, is what creates a lot of uncertainty. But you look back. So back to your constitutional question. The constitutional question of what the president has done, you mentioned May 1st, Chad. Let me go back to the example we have of the Spanish flu in 1918. That is something that swept the nation. We just about had it under control. when all the guys from World War I came home, and they came home and many of them had the flu, and we started a second pandemic. So we got back-to-back things, a resurgence of Spanish flu. It's interesting, the president during that time is President Woodrow Wilson. President Woodrow Wilson didn't even talk about the Spanish flu. How can you do that? 675,000 Americans. It's real simple. Constitutionally, the Constitution puts all health care at the state level. It does not put it at the federal level. So this was not a federal question. It is a state question. In the Constitution, you have 17 what are called enumerated powers. The Constitution says, federal government, here's 17 things you're allowed to do. And then in the 10th Amendment, it says, if it's not one of those 17 things, it belongs to the states to deal with. Healthcare was one of those issues. So what you have is, I think the president did an excellent job of keeping the federal government from managing this whole crisis. All he did from the very beginning was come out with federal guidelines. We've got all these experts. Here's what they're saying you need to look for. Here's what they're saying about shutting down. And he turned it to the states to do that. And so from the beginning, he respected what we call federalism. And that is, this is not the role of the federal government to handle this crisis. This goes to the states. And then you have the state constitution, which gave various authority to mayors. Some states have more authority for mayors. Some have less authority for mayors. In some states, you're seeing the governor handle all of it. In some states, you're seeing the counties and the cities handle all of it. So that's the first thing, is this is nothing new. And this is actually constitutional the way he's gone at it.
Well, I mean, we see that with, he gave guidelines, and then some
Yep.
states did not even shut down in the federal.
That's right.
And he did not. I mean, like South Dakota, they never shut down.
That's right.
And so we didn't have. I've heard people say that the President Trump shut the country down and shut the economy down. I don't think he actually ever did that.
No, he never did that. And interestingly, I mean, there's several ways of looking at what happened even with the stimulus, because he recommended shutting down. The governors chose that guideline. And so for about 2 months, things were shut down. A number of states coming back online. Georgia was one of the first. Texas is headed that direction as well. But that stimulus that he put out the first time, that first, 2.5 trillion that came out, I'm not for government funding individual folks. That's not. But in this case, it was a different thing. This was almost like the takings clause in the Fifth Amendment. If the federal government comes in and it takes your property, they have to pay you for that. So what the government did was shut down your ability to make an income, your ability to work. And so that payment of stimulus was much more like the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. Government is paying for the damage it caused. It's not creating a welfare system. Now, the second, third, fourth, and now we're working on the fourth stimulus bill now. Those are getting more into social programs and social welfare, et cetera. That's not damages paid. So the first part of that, I think it's reasonable to say it was constitutional. It's getting into stuff now where we're looking at all sorts of periphery things that are not related to COVID. And let's move my pet projects through. We're going to get another stimulus, so let's do this or build this bridge or whatever. That's not COVID, So yes, to a degree, he shut down stuff. But here's the other consideration. The Constitution operates on the basis of the principles set forth in the Declaration, 6 principles. Everything the Declaration set forth is embodied in the Constitution. So when you look at the Declaration, it says first is there's a creator. Second is the creator gives certain rights to every individual. We call these inalienable rights. And the third is government exists to protect those rights. So this is where we have the First Amendment right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to petition, the Second Amendment right to defend ourselves, the Third Amendment right to our homes, et cetera. So all of that are considered inalienable rights. Now, one of the interesting things the Founding Fathers said was one of the inalienable God-given rights that God gives to every individual is the right to earn a living and to provide for your own family. So for the government to come in and shut down business, which is not been done before. In previous pandemics, the government might say, hey, can you guys reduce your hours? Don't shut the business down, but maybe instead of being open 12 hours a day, maybe think about being open 8 hours a day. They did not take away the livelihood of people. And that's what's new in this pandemic. And that's a real problem because government's supposed to be protecting your inalienable rights, and the right to provide for yourself and your family and income is one of those rights. So this is really, I think, the most direct attack on our rights. Now, I say that, I can't say it's the most direct, that is a direct attack. We have also seen all sorts of attacks on First Amendment rights. 4 of the 5 First Amendment rights have clearly been violated. The only thing that is not is the freedom of press. That's the one thing they've left alone. They haven't regulated the press, but they've regulated speech and assembly and petition and church, et cetera. The Second Amendment right, we saw the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi say, hey, you can't have concealed carry in this pandemic. I'm suspending all your rights. You can't suspend my right to defend myself just because of a pandemic. And so we're seeing the Third Amendment, the same thing. What you do in the privacy of your own home is now subject to government control and regulation. The other problem we have is the whole Constitution is the due process clauses, 4th through 8th Amendment, are built on the premise that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. We're now assuming every American is guilty of having COVID, and we're quarantining you all instead of saying who are the ones who actually have it. Let's quarantine them. So we've actually gone after the innocent in a way we've never done before. So there's a lot of new things here, but it's not unprecedented, and the Constitution speaks to all of them.
We've seen a lot of Americans actually speaking up, and particularly, I just got back from California, and you know, surprisingly, I've been surprised at the response of Californians, both. And what I've really been surprised with is the Californians standing up to Governor Newsom, or on both sides of the political aisle. You have not just conservatives standing up for their freedoms and rights and the right to work, but it seems like this has brought people together on both sides of the aisle to say, hey, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or where you stand politically, but I want to be able to go to work. I want to be able to feed my kids. I want to be able to get back to my way of life, and I feel my freedoms have been infringed upon.
Well, it's interesting that even in Massachusetts today, you're seeing protests in Massachusetts, and that's about as unusual as seeing them in California, but you're right. This has drawn people together. We're seeing even in polling, and this is a shock to me, that in polling, generally, the way it has been in polling is the older you are, the more conscious you are of your constitutional rights. This time, the millennials are the most offended over the suspension of constitutional rights. So it's the younger voters that are saying, this is dead wrong. You can't take away our right to work, our right to assemble, our right to speech. You can't shut us down like this, which is good to see millennials come across that way, because now, again, that's pulling both sides of the aisle. Younger voters tend to be a little more liberal, a little more progressive, a little more Democrat. They're speaking out on this. This really has unified the country. We see it as a real opportunity for reset. We're in the middle of working right now, creating model legislation. We have a network of about 1,000 legislators, and there's going to be a lot of resets done here, because these emergency powers that were granted in state constitutions are generally, we figured there was going to be a tornado or a hurricane. So 2 to 3, 4 weeks. Nobody was seeing 2 months. And some of these governors are saying it's going to go till September. Nobody was seeing 7 months. And so now state legislatures are saying, whoa, time out. Like I think it's in Wisconsin that it's 45 days is all the emergency powers are. Well, the governor's taken it and has now told the unelected doctor that you're going to be making policy for the state. No, you can't do that. But if you can't get the legislature together, how do you solve that? So, we're looking at ways that will start creating limitations on executive orders, allow legislature to assemble, things that have never been considered before, because we've never faced government overreach like we've seen it today.
I want to ask you further on that, but I want to jump back real quick. That's something you said that I think is important. Do you see this with the millennials and with liberals as an awakening? And with that awakening, people looking at their from a conservative approach to constitutional rights, with that awakening, do you see it affecting the polls and even voter impact moving forward in 2020?
Yeah, it's disappointing in some ways that it's not as bipartisan as I would want to see it. Polling from 2 days ago, I think it was, said that only 12% of Democrats think the government think that the country should get back to normal. They think it should stay closed down. We're talking average blue-collar grassroots Democrat. Only 12% think that. On the other hand,
you believe those polls?
I do. I do. On the other hand, we're seeing that, with Republicans, it's 44%, but that's still half of them. That is on that. We don't want to get back to it. So the numbers are pretty low. Even in Texas, where I am, which is considered a very red conservative state, we're seeing polling that in Texas, 85% of Texans think that if you've been around someone who had COVID, that the government should quarantine you. Now, wait a minute. That's my freedom of association. Now, if you can prove that I have it, that's a different thing. But for 85% of Texans to think to say the government should step in and pull you out of circulation, that's crazy. So I believe the polling. There is a whole lot of fear going on here. You may have seen that Facebook is actually taking down videos of doctors who are disagreeing with Dr. Fauci. If you're not carrying the National Institute of Health and the CDC view, we're taking all those other doctors off. Well, look at Sweden. Sweden didn't shut down at all. Look what happened. What we've heard about the herd immunization they did over there, and they had high numbers early, but then look how far it's dropped. In South Dakota, you mentioned Governor Noem, Kristi Noem, what they've done up there. Those alternative views are not getting out there. And so the media and certain politicians have kept a lot of fear whipped up on this thing, and most folks are only hearing one side of the debate.
So you mentioned overreach from the governors and state officials, clearly infringing upon civil liberties and our people's what we see in most of interest is people's right to work.
Yeah.
People. There's going to be people that are going to be so impacted they're never going to get their lives back. They're never going to be back to where they were. They're going to have lost their 401ks, their businesses that they worked their lives for. The stimulus is not going to rescue those individuals. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the 10th Amendment, government overreach, the governor's overreach, and how's that going to play out?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing because, Chad, you mentioned a lot of people, this does affect them. It looks like that about 25% of small businesses will not come back off of this. And small businesses is what employs 80% of the nation's people. So this is a big impact on small business. The estimates right now also are that between 25 and 35,000 churches will not reopen. Small community churches that serve the community, this is essentially killed them. They will not be able to recover from this and come back. So there are very real consequences to what's happening here, which is why that it is certainly a recession that is expected to occur. It could be depression, depends on how stuff goes this. And there's also the unintended consequences, because this thing of being isolated for the last 2 months and you can't get out and you got social distancing and people are being encouraged to snitch on their neighbors if you see your neighbor out. It's unbelievable, but it creates a mental stress. And so we have seen that for every percentage that unemployment goes up, if unemployment goes up 1%, suicides go up 1.6%. So the mental trauma associated with the isolation, with the fear, everything else, they're predicting an additional 18,000 to 45,000 extra suicides as a result of the closures that have happened. And then when you start throwing in the businesses that won't be coming back, the families that will be devastated by loss, there's a lot of psychological stuff going here as well, which is certainly something you guys deal with full time. That's your bailiwick.
To me, how is that less important than impacts of a virus?
That's right.
And Mighty Oaks, our foundation, for example, we're not able to provide literally critical life-saving services to the warriors who are coming to us for help because it's not considered essential. We've had to shut down 6 programs at 4 different ranches. Hundreds of warriors that were coming for help. These are guys that have either attempted suicide, contemplating suicide with ideations, or in anxiety, depression. They're guys that we tell them the worst thing you could do is isolate. The worst thing you can do is isolate. And we're telling them to isolate and stay home. We were doing things like standing up online programming and virtual programming, but we all know, common sense will tell you that's not adequate or effective, nor do they have interest in participating with it. And this has been the VA's response too. The Veterans Administration has stopped providing in-person mental health care to millions and millions of veterans who are in dire need of mental health care. I've spoken to clinical psychologists at the VA who are caring for these warriors and saying, hey, they stopped. There's people that we're making headway with. We had to stop mid care with them. And we have to shift over to Zoom or teleconferencing, and they're not wanting that kind of care. And so what about those individuals? I think it would be repulsive if we look back the last 6 weeks and seeing how many veterans, the spike in veteran suicides. And I don't think that report will ever come out and expose that, unfortunately. But I believe that's, why is mental health care not essential? Who picks and chooses what's essential? If I had an engine of a car, they'd be like a lot of parts. And you'd say, well, that one's essential. This one's not. This one's more important than other. But if I pull even that least essential part out, the engine is going to stop working. That's our economy. That's our way of life.
Yeah, and it's a real problem. Even if you go back to the Bible, you guys faith-based as you are, so am I. I'm a Christian. The first thing God said after he made man is, this is very good. The next thing he said was, it's not good for man to be alone. And that isolation thing, from the very beginning, God says isolation is not good. You got to be around others. You need to be with others. Man's a social animal. That's just the way he made us. And that was one of the first things he said was, it's not good to be alone. So the isolation is there, and that's not a good deal. And the essential services, I mean, this is the thing now. This is one of the problems we have with where we are now in America, is we've lost any kind of moral consensus. 2 out of 3 Americans think that there is no absolute moral right and wrong. It's up to individual determination. So therefore, you have the governor of Texas saying church is an essential service. I'm going to leave churches open. And you have the mayor of New York City saying, if you open your church, it's a criminal offense. I will throw you in jail. You're not an essential service. You've got the governor of Michigan saying abortion's an essential service. You stay open. And you got the governor of Alabama saying abortion's not essential. That's elective surgery. You can't stay open. I mean, how do you have the same thing that's essential and not essential at the same time? And when you throw that open to the individual persuasion of the particular governor or mayor, you're not going to have the rule of law. You're going to have the rule of opinion. And it's the opinion of the governor, the opinion of the mayor that's going to rule the state. And that's not the rule of law. And that's what America was established on, was, as John Adams said, it's a government of laws, not of men. Well, we're getting away from that, which is not good. And that's, I really think, I'm optimistic about this, Chad. I can't tell you how optimistic. I really see a chance for a reset here, that people now see how government, how much reach it does have, how much overreach it's got. They haven't paid attention to it because it didn't affect them personally, but now it's affecting everybody personally. This is the first time the government came to live in the house with me. I've never, I've always been able to keep government at arm's length. I can't now. Right. And so I think the opportunity for major seismic shifts and a major awareness of what our rights are, and I want them back, I think that's a real possibility that will happen.
Yeah, and I think it's going to result in a change in the voting booths. Yeah. Personally, I mean, I think that, as people vote in the future, they're not going to look at the party. They're going to look at these.
Well, Chad, I mean, if you look at what's happened, I think the November, I said this a month ago, I think the November election, and I don't care whether it's for mayor, whether it is for governor, or whether it's for president, at all levels, you have 2 separate worldviews here. Is that we need more government or we need less government. And so the debate in September, or the debate in November, is going to be, we need, the government could have stopped this. We should have nationalized the business. We should have nationalized healthcare. We should have done this at the federal level. We need more government. The city should have taken, we're going to have all these guys saying government should have done more. And that's going to be a choice that Americans make. Now, interestingly, in the 1980 Spanish flu epidemic that happened, the next election that followed that was in 1920. And the reaction was, we need bigger government. We should have had government intervene to do more. We should have, and it was very interesting. That was the choice. And what the people did was they went in a super conservative direction and chose constitutionalist Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge. And Calvin Coolidge may be the most constitutional guy since George Washington. I mean, Calvin Coolidge was unbelievably, he was constitution oriented, and the nation chose that, and they stayed with that for several elections, now until they got a progressive Republican, Herbert Hoover, who said we need more and more government. So here's a Republican president saying more governor, which led to Franklin Roosevelt and progressives. But the reaction of the people after that huge government intervention in that pandemic of 1918 was, we want less government, we want more constitution. And I'm hoping and believing that's going to be the choice people make. I'm with you, Chad. I think there's going to be a lot of choices made at the polling booths, and I don't think it's going to be what the pundits are expecting or predicting.
So with this overreach and these governors and mayors, like you said, it's not the rule of law, it's the rule of opinion. We're having to live under the governor's opinions. Mm-hmm. Is that constitutional? And I mean, we see a lot of sheriffs saying, I'm not enforcing this. Like, I'm not enforcing these.
It's interesting. Sheriffs, we have seen for about 5 years that sheriffs are the guys really concerned with the Constitution, and police are not nearly so much concerned with the Constitution. Police have become an enforcement arm for local officials to enforce their policies. And why a policeman would arrest someone that is protesting the government with social distancing. I mean, we've seen them arresting people who are wearing masks, who are keeping 6-foot distancing, but because they're protesting government, you know, Mr. Cop, I appreciate law enforcement. I appreciate the blue, but I also appreciate the fact you took an oath to uphold the Constitution. And the
Right.
Constitution guarantees a right to free speech. These people have done nothing but violate the order of a mayor. They haven't violated the Constitution, and your duty to the Constitution is greater than your duty to the mayor.
Right.
And so I've been very disappointed at how many policemen have been involved in arresting people for exercising constitutional rights, even under the social distancing guidelines and even under all the mandates. But because they disagree with the governor or mayor, they're being arrested. Are you kidding me? This is crazy. But the sheriffs,
Sheriffs are different because the sheriffs are elected officials.
they're elected officials, and they're standing for the Constitution. You know, we even saw the red flag laws and go down in Colorado. 85% of the sheriffs in Colorado said, we're not enforcing that. That's a clearly unconstitutional law, and we're not doing that. Now, that's the way it should be with every law enforcement, including police. And that's been a thing that's made me really sad, because I really do back the blue. I back law enforcement. I respect them. But I respect the Constitution more than I respect any individual.
Yeah. So I guess break it down into, I asked the question in this like everyday terms. I'm a business owner. I own a restaurant, and the governor says that if I open my restaurant, I'm going to be fined and I'm going to be put in jail. I decide to do it anyway, and I get fined. I get arrested. Can I fight? How can I fight these charges? Can I get out of jail and go back and open again? What recourses do I have? Because I've been talking to a lot of business owners, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm going to take the fine. I'm opening. I don't care about a ticket. I don't care about a fine. I don't care about going to jail. I care about being able to feed my kids and run my business, not lose my business."
I tell you, I appreciate the backbone, and I applaud that, and I stand with it. And they have said it right. I know I'm going to get fined. You know, this is one of the things, even in the Bible, you look at civil disobedience in the Bible. Hey, the civil law says, Daniel, you can't pray to anybody except the king. And Daniel says, watch this, I'm going to pray to God. Well, that was civil disobedience. Guess what? He did get thrown in the lion's den. I mean, and that's the thing that happens to civil disobedience. You may pay a penalty for it, but you're standing for what's right. And so I appreciate business owners saying, you know what, I may get fined, but this is the right thing to do. And what's happening is, in the last week, we've seen 2 really egregious arrests in Texas, where judges have really knocked at the people who are business owners who tried to stand up and do this, and they're getting jail time for doing it. I'll tell you what, it has created such an uprising in the state of Texas that I don't think other judges are going to keep doing what these 2 judges did, because they don't want to face the backlash. And so while these 2 people, one of them had a $7,000 fine, we'll see what the other one's going to get. There was a price to pay. They have blazed a trail for others to have more freedoms as a result. And so we're actually working with thousands of business owners right now, working with them in the White House to get stuff open. But business owners need to say, you know what, state, we're going to do this. It's the right thing. Your opinion does not guide me. The Constitution does. I have an inalienable right to work and to provide for my family and my employees, and you can't stop that. That's courage, but you need to understand, you may become an example. You may get singled out. You may get arrested. You may get a goofy mayor or judge to do something, but that's just a price we have to pay for standing for what's right.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of Christians say this, that we need to, follow our leaders and whatever laws are in place. But and a lot of them point to, I think Romans 13 with Paul, and they kind of use Paul as, Paul's saying that you need to respect the government authority. But I mean, you look at Paul and Peter, who is they spent most of the Bible as them being in jail for civil disobedience and standing up for what's right. And
I'll point out that the guys who use Romans 13, that kind of tells me they haven't read the full Bible. Because if you go to Hebrews 11, which are the heroes of our faith, nearly everyone that's a hero of our faith is guilty of civil disobedience. The Hebrew midwives, Pharaoh said, hey, go kill all the Hebrew boys under 2 years old. They said, no, we don't think we'll do that. Well, they're heroes. We look at Daniel. We look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We look at how many times did Jesus commit civil disobedience? They told him, hey, you can't heal on the Sabbath. He said, watch this. Hey, you have to respect the temple. Watch me throw the money changers out of the temple. He just did stuff time and time again. It is crazy to invoke Romans 13 and ignore every other verse in the Bible. Now, the attitude's got to be right. I'll say you can't be a belligerent anarchist. You can't do that. But I'm going to disobey government if it violates my constitutional rights or my God-given rights or what the Bible tells me to do. You watch me. I'm going to do what the right thing is, regardless of what the government says.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the difference between doing what's right and being obnoxious about it.
Yeah, that's right. Attitude is everything. Attitude is everything. Man, you may get arrested just for a bad attitude doing the right thing. Don't do that. Don't do that. Have a respect. I mean, God did put governing authorities over us. We need to respect them. I may disagree with them, but I'll do it respectfully and with the right attitude.
So you get fined, you stand up for what's right, you get fined, or you're going to be able to fight those fines or the repercussions that you have as a citizen back towards the government. I'm certain that there'll be, so many lawsuits against governors, against the state. What's that look like?
Well, the first group that got started in this about 3 weeks ago was churches, because churches said, we don't care what the governor says, we're going to have service whether we like it or not. And several of those services even did social distancing. One building held 268, and I think they had 16 people in it. Spread them out, and they still got arrested and fined or whatever. We have not lost a single one of those cases, not a single one, since it started 3 weeks ago. Now, it's now moving into business. It's now moving into other areas. Cases are being filed. I know of 3 lawsuits going right now against governors for their overreach. It's a little early to have results back yet. We expect results within the next week or two. But we have seen that so far, at least with that first group, which was churches, haven't lost a single case with that at all. And I've got to say, a lot of that deals with judges. We have 191 judges on the court that have been put there in the last 3 years, and they're the best group of constitutional thinking judges I've seen in my lifetime. And I've been through a lot of presidents and a lot of good judges, but I've seen a lot of bad judges. This is the best I've seen. So I have great optimism for what I think we will find out of this. But Chad, the thing is, right now, there are attorneys wanting to defend these cases and take them on. The one we had in Dallas and Odessa, there's attorneys wanting to take those on. There may not be an attorney to take you on, but there's a lot that are looking for it. And I think that as this goes forward, we're going to win most of these cases. I hope all of them, but I think we'll win an overwhelming number. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's my thoughts too. Just on this topic, what can Americans do? People are listening to this thinking, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I should be able to get back to work. The economy should be restarted. Maybe they want to risk, going back to work themselves or not. Maybe they're not a business owner. Just what could everyday Americans do to participate in turning things around?
There's several things. I'm going to say one, and please don't think I'm in any way being demeaning, but I'm going to talk about one because I saw yesterday that 57% of Americans say they have never read the Constitution. So the first thing I'm going to say is read the Constitution. Maybe you've read it before, maybe you know it, maybe you've memorized it. But there is a great statement by John Jay, who's an original Chief Justice, U.S. Supreme Court, a founding father who's an author of the Federalist Papers. He was one of the original guys. He's the guy that Washington put over the Supreme Court. He said, every citizen of his country, every citizen ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country. He said, by knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they're being violated and be the more prepared to defend and assert them. So you read the Constitution, you study the Constitution, you teach the Constitution, then you recognize when your rights are being violated, then you will defend and you will assert those rights. Those 7 verbs stand out to me. So I would say start there. The second thing is, don't look at yourself and say, I'm just one person out of 330 million. What can I do? You can do a ton. The American Revolution, one of the bad things about history today is we use stereotypes. We look at the American Revolution and say, you know what? The Patriots whipped the British. Not quite. Only 25% of Americans wanted independence from the British. 25% did not want independence, and 50% didn't care as long as it didn't affect them. When you look at Americans that actually did something, only 9% of Americans participated in the war for independence. We won freedom because 9% were willing to stand. So this thing of who am I? Well, You need to be one of the 9%. You need to go be a voice in your community. You need to sound off the city council. You need to sound off the mayor. You need to write a letter, an op-ed letter to the editor. You need to get on social media. You got a voice. Use that voice. My gosh. Don't wait to have a majority behind you. You can be one that'll switch 5 or 10 people. Then they'll go switch 5 or 10 people, and they'll switch it. It ripples outward. So the second thing I'd say is don't think lightly of yourself and think that I can't make a difference. Your opinions do matter, and there's a whole lot of people think like you, but they're being silent like you. So get out there and do it. And then the third thing is start helping educate other people. Hey, did you guys see what happened over here in Dallas? I'm putting this up on my Facebook. You need to know what the overreach is. Start educating Americans. And as most people get aware of that, they really don't like what they're seeing. But most people aren't aware of what's going on in, North Dakota or in New York City or in Miami. Or post those stories. Share that with your neighbors. Get this thing where people are aware of what their rights are, and then they'll defend and assert those rights. So that would be the easy guidance I would give, Chad.
Yeah, that's great. Some things in there. The 10th Amendment. That's talking about learning the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment has come up a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of social media feeds where people are people that want to stay home, or maybe they're enjoying the unemployment, or maybe they're enjoying the break, or maybe they're just scared. And maybe they've been influenced by the media and just scared. But the 10th Amendment has come up quite a bit, and I just wondered if you could talk a little bit. I know there's some historical case law in the 10th Amendment and state police powers.
Yeah. What happens with the 10th Amendment, and I'm going to go back to something I used earlier, was the phrase enumerated powers. And having just talked about, hey, it's worth reading the Constitution, it'll take you 15 minutes to read it. Only 7 articles in it. There's 27 amendments. Easy stuff. 15, 20 minutes is done. Here's a little assignment. This might take you a half hour. The federal Constitution is what deals with the federal government. Okay, so we have the federal government. Just read the Constitution and just make a list of all the things the federal government is empowered to do. Those are what we call enumerated powers, and there will be 17 things the government can do. And then look at that list and say, what's not on this list? And you go, oh my gosh, education's not on this list. What's not on this list is religion. What's not on this list is business. What's not on this list is healthcare. And all the things you don't find on that list. Then when you read the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, it says anything that the Constitution didn't give to the federal government belongs to the states. And the 9th Amendment says to the people. So first, start seeing what belongs in your jurisdiction, not the government's jurisdiction. Find out what's yours. And that goes back to what we just talked about. John Jay, he said, when you know the Constitution, you can defend and assert the Constitution. And assert is a big word I use. That means going on the offensive. Chad, from military stuff, if you're on the defensive all the time, the other guys are defining the battle. You got to go on the offensive. And that's why we're seeing so many lawsuits filed right now. We're going on the offensive, defining the battle. We're getting judges on record right now. We're taking that and marching from state to state. I'm saying marching in figurative sense. We're internet marching from state to state saying, hey, did you guys see this opinion? We just wanted this judge. You now have the right to do this. Do this in your state. So I would say the 10th Amendment, as you've mentioned, it's a huge, huge thing. It says, except for those 17 things we gave the federal government in the Constitution, everything else comes home to us. It's in our hands. It's stuff we can do. The 9th Amendment says it all belongs to the people. And the 10th Amendment says if it's not in the Constitution, states get to handle it. So knowing that, that puts so much more power back at a local level, which means we can get involved. Now, here's another thing I'll throw out about people think they can't make a difference. Right now, the city of Houston, the population of Houston is larger than 26 individual states in the United States. Okay, population is that large. City of Houston, only 2% of the adults in Houston elected the mayor of the city of Houston. So you're talking a handful of people elected essentially what's a governor over 26 states. That's why if you get involved in local stuff where you are, it is so much easier to make a difference. And I encourage people to do that. Let your mayor know. If your mayor gets 50 calls from people in the city, he's going to be terrified. She's going to be terrified because they never get that many calls. There's 35,000 cities in America. And there's only a few that are big, like New York City and LA and others. Rest of them are pretty small. And they don't hear from people because people just think they won't listen to me, so they never call. Call your mayor. Get your neighbors to call your mayor. Say, I saw you did this. This is crazy. You can't shut businesses down. We got to be able to go back to work. It'll scare your mayor to death. I mean, this is something we're just using your voice, understanding the 9th and the 10th Amendment, the power that you have. Oh my gosh, there is so much more power there than we think we have. We just haven't been using it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a kind of a complacency amongst our nation.
Well, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, they're not going to listen to me, so we don't say anything. So they don't listen to us because they never hear from us. You know, if the Bible says in Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If we get the attitude, you know, I can make a difference. I can get people to listen to me. I can get that changed. If you start thinking that way, you'll start acting that way. If you start acting that way, then you got a real shot of making it happen. But the complacency, as you termed it, Chad, I mean, that is self-fulfilling prophecy for doom. You're going to get nothing done if you think like that.
All right, so I kind of want to kind of wrap it up with something that's super interesting to me. Not interesting. It's you know me a little bit, so I got a kind of a conspiracy side of my mind wanders.
Yep.
This is this topic of conversation. What are the real numbers? How accurate is this information? I mean, we're seeing things like 200, like hospitals finding, us finding out at a hospital misidentified 200 deaths, and the incentive is there for $39,000 a pop for every COVID death in a hospital. So there's so many things that probably affect the numbers, from media influence to political agendas to money being made in the pharmaceutical industry and the hospitals. So can we trust these numbers? Are they real numbers? Do we even know?
There are real numbers that have been kind of inflated. And here you hit part of it, Chad. That first stimulus bill said, hey, if you're a hospital, we understand you might be overloaded. And so what we're going to do is every COVID case you have in the hospital, we'll pay you an additional 20% above what we would pay. Hey, if you got a bounty like that, I'm going to go back for 5 years and say, this guy had a cough when he come in. It could have been COVID. This guy had a sore throat. He died. It could have been COVID. Well, all of a sudden, these could have beens are now getting registered as actuals because we gave an economic incentive to the hospitals and the doctors to say, if this is COVID, is a good-hearted attempt, but there's always unintended consequences. Sure. We want to make sure that you can deal with what they expected to be the overload. And so the numbers are inflated in many ways. We've talked to several doctors who said that they're being told by hospitals and by their medical groups that any conceivable connection you can make to COVID, make it because it gets us more money. Oh, no. That's not good reporting. That's not truthful stuff. So, there's a snowball's chance that it might have been COVID 5 years ago, but probably not. There's a snowball's chance that some of those other deaths, pneumonia, maybe it was COVID, but it might have been pneumonia, just like you said it was. So that's a problem. The other thing is the modeling is all wrong, and they haven't been adjusting the modeling. When this thing first hit, before they knew how it was going to react, the modeling said that they estimated that there would be about 2 million deaths in America. The county judge, and that's a judge is not a judge, and since you think of a judge, the county judge over Dallas is the kind of the elected, if you will, the mayor of the county of Dallas, not the city of Dallas, but the county. He said, we're going to have 495,000 Texans die. That was a projection. We've had 867 die. So he's still operating on the premise we're going to have 400. He's shutting down everything. That's why they arrested that woman for opening her beauty salon. He's operating on bad modeling. He's got bad modeling all the way through. Wisconsin thought they would have 2,100 deaths. They've had 300. They've not adjusted to the modeling. And so it's given them an opportunity for government control to use bad modeling. And that's the problem with a lot of this, Chad, is they have not updated their numbers. They've not kept up with what's actually happening. I mean, back when this started, it looked like that it was what was called a transmutating virus. The early reports were that there is not a vaccine for this because it's like AIDS. Every time you find a vaccine for AIDS, it becomes a new virus. You have to start again. They thought that's what this was. Well, now they find out it's a flat virus. It does not transmutate. So if you can eliminate it, you've eliminated it. they didn't think it was going to be responsive to weather. Now they find it's responsive to weather, warmer weather's. So this should change all of our policy considerations. It's
Right.
not. They're still using the old model.
Well, intentionally using the old modeling. I mean, to me, that's either intentional or it's incompetence. Either one is just as bad.
That's right.
And
It's bad.
is there repercussions? I mean, who's got somebody? I mean, the impact on everyday Americans. Someone should be held responsible for this. Is there going to be any accountability? I mean,
yeah, there's going to be some accountability. This is why a number of lawsuits are being filed against governors right now. But here's part of the problem: is we have never really anticipated so many mayors and governors not reading the Constitution, or at least not following its intent, including the state constitution. For example, you've got the governor of Wisconsin. I think he has a 60-day window. I think it's 60 days. And then after that, he loses all of his power. So what he did, coming up on 60 days, he said, I'm giving all the power to the state medical official here in Wisconsin, and he's going to make all policy. Whoa, whoa, whoa. He's not an elected official. How do you take, and the whole premise of the Constitution is the people are to be accessible to government, and elected officials accountable to the people run the policies. So that's a governor in Wisconsin that is trying to find a way around the Constitution. We didn't write the Constitution for people who were trying to find a way around it. We wrote it for people we thought they would respect. So what we're seeing right now are all sorts of things being done that nobody ever expected. So as a result, here in Texas, we only have a legislative session every other year for 140 days. Well, we did not have a legislative session this year, and that means all of our other officials are making policy and not the legislature. So now we're having to say, hey, we need to create a provision whereby we can call the legislature back into session to deal with emergencies that come up. It needs to be the people's elected representatives, not the bureaucrats. So there's going to be a lot of changes out of this, Chad. Again, we have a network of about 1,000 legislators we're working with. I cannot tell you all the changes that will come that are designed to get more power back to the people. But here's the deal. If we get more power back to the people and the people don't use it, it doesn't matter what changes we make. We're going to have to get people willing to step up and say, hey, no, we want this power back in our hands, and we will use it. We're going to use it in the elections. We're going to use it between now and the elections. We're going to be calling our elected officials. We're going to be holding them accountable. If people don't do that, it doesn't matter what changes we make with policy.
Right. So that's good. So like I said, I'm kind of conspiracist. My mind wanders on some of this stuff. And I have to ask, and maybe you could just answer this in an opinion level, because I don't think any of us really know, but is this sinister, or is there a sinister agenda, or there's sinister players? I mean, you see things like, to me, like, in the midst of a crisis, they're using it for political advantage, asking for a mail-in election, or elections in November to be not in person. So is there an underlying agenda that's sinister? Are there players involved? This is a globalist thing. Is they're trying to attack the president? Obviously the media is, but beyond the media.
Well, you remember the admonition out of the previous White House: you never let a crisis go to waste. So there will be a lot of people who will be part of doing something bad, but not meaning to be. They're told by officials to do it, or they think it's the right thing to do. But there are those that see this as a way to extend power, to expand power, to move agendas forward. There's no question Planned Parenthood sees this as a way to move their agenda forward. I mean, there's no question. They're going to take anything that comes up as a way to do that. There are always groups like that. Even when Nazi Germany did what it did, there were a lot of unaware dupes that helped Hitler, including a lot of evangelical pastors who said, hey, we just need to go along with what the state says. Well, they didn't know that he was executing Jews and doing the Holocaust, but they gave him some power that he should not have had. So that's always the case in every crisis. There is sinister stuff at play here. And there's a lot of people who will be used without knowing it because they're good-hearted and they expect the best out of people, which is not going to happen. There's no question in my mind that a lot of this is driven by China, who has taken great political advantage of this across the world. I think we've been very unaware, or haven't been looking at how much China has extended its power during this time and what they have done to help themselves globally. we've been so fixated with the four walls of our house that we get tired of looking at it every day. I mean, what China has done in moving itself forward globally and moving itself forward in relations with our allies and usurping America, oh my gosh, that's a big deal to me, because this is global security in a lot of ways. So there's no question sinister stuff is at play, including in the United States. And there's no question that some people are unwittingly helping it move forward. And that's where, again, you got to be, sunshine is the best disinfectant. You shine a light on this stuff, it really helps.
Yeah. Obviously we're not going to see China take responsibility for this, but, what are some things that could affect, economically, international trade? What do you think we'll see moving forward with, Attorney General Barr has said that China is going to answer for this. The president has said that. What's that actually mean?
Well, the problem with China is they don't put people as a high commodity asset. They consider people as expendable. And so they put all their money into their war machine and their expansion, not into their people. And so with the number of people they have, we see what's happening now. This is one of the greatest religious persecutions China's ever had. I mean, what they're doing to Christians and killing people, it's unbelievable. It's not being covered much, but they're seeing this as a great opportunity to expand their influence. And they don't mind if they lose people, and they don't mind if a bunch of people get wiped out in coronavirus, less mouths they have to feed. But what they're doing is they're creating military alliances right now. They're creating alliances in a lot of our NATO neighbors. One of the reasons that Italy was hit so hard with corona, higher than any other, was Italy has a replenishment rate, or if you will, a fertility rate of 1.1. A nation has to have a fertility rate of 2.1 just to survive with no growth. So in Europe, no nation in Europe has a 2.1 fertility rate. They're all below that. Italy's
immigration based, right?
It's immigration based, but in Italy, they don't have a young workforce. So they hired the Chinese to come in, be their workforce, build their infrastructure. China is giving low-cost loans to all these nations, building their bridges, building their schools, building their hospitals. They're losing people like crazy doing it. China just prints itself more money anytime it wants it. They'll go bankrupt at some time, but in the meantime, they're giving lots of money out across the world. They're buying the favor of so many of our NATO allies, who now will China say, hey, we lent you $43 billion. You can't vote for that for NATO. I mean, that you got to stay with us on this. We're seeing China extend itself in ways that will threaten American security. We have to make them pay, but we have to get the world on our side to help do that. And that's going to be hard with China doing what it's doing right now in this virus.
Yeah. Well, we could even venture off on a whole nother show with that. I really enjoyed this, David. These were a lot of questions. As I planned for this, there's a lot of questions that I had. People asked me when I called you to come on. I was just because I didn't have a lot of answers, and I knew the man that did, and you never let down. I just appreciate you so much. Before we get off, I'd love you to just tell everybody what you do at WallBuilders and how they can be involved.
Yeah, WallBuilders, we do a whole lot with constitutional issues, with legal issues. We're involved in several cases of the U.S. Supreme Court right now, and other cases in federal courts. So we really want to stand up for constitutional rights, but we really want to encourage people that they can make a difference. And so, right now, don't be discouraged over anything you've heard. This is all stuff that we're extremely optimistic about. We think can be turned. It just takes people being involved, and that's an easy thing to do. So you can go to wallbuilders.com, get lots of historical resources, lots of resources on the stuff we're talking about constitutionally, even on politics, other things. A lot there that may help people.
Yeah. Wallbuilders.com. Thanks so much, David. Look forward to seeing you soon from Mighty Oaks, and just to go back to the ranch and shoot some turtles.
Absolutely, brother. Bless you, man. Good to see you.
Well, hey guys, thanks for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, definitely like, subscribe, share it with your friends and listeners on Mojo. Thanks for tuning in. God bless all you guys, and see you next week.